Ready for your next adventure? KLM Royal Dutch Airlines brings you Real Deal Days, your chance to uncover real adventures and create real memories. Taste the real Amsterdam, explore the real Barcelona, and discover the real Johannesburg, along with many more destinations around the world. Secure your real deal today and seize the moment with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. Restrictions apply. See terms and conditions at KLM.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Hey Giants fans, this is Chris Franklin from NJ Advanced Media, and welcome to Talk is Cheap podcast, the show where we discuss all things related to the New York Giants. Now, before we begin, I want to remind you that you can read our content on NJ.com/Giants and make sure to bookmark that to get the latest Giants news and analysis. Well, free agency is upon us in earnest. We'll talk about what the Giants have done so far, and also we'll talk about their continuing search to find out who will be their starting quarterback next season. And to do that, we're going to bring in Giants beat reporter Daryl Slater. Daryl, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Chris. How you doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's a little more active with the Giants in free agency as opposed to down south with some of the other teams that we've seen so far that we cover here at NJ.com. But it makes it more interesting. So that's why I'm glad to get to talk to you about what's going on for all this. And let's get started with our kickoff question. And the Giants are in the midst of their own version of The Bachelor right now. And instead of trying to find love and presenting a ring to their potential suitor at quarterback, they're looking for somebody and to lead them, the signal caller, and to offer him a contract instead of a ring. Well, Russell Wilson is scheduled to visit the Giants on Friday. You have Joe Flacco, who paid the team a visit already. And then there's Aaron Rodgers, who himself is taking long walks on the beach, and he's still available as an option. Daryl, what's the latest you've heard about the QB situation?
Yeah, the Giants want Aaron Rodgers to be their quarterback, and that perhaps will mean that they won't draft a quarterback at number 3 or higher. And we'll talk more about the draft, I'm sure. But yeah, their fallback options are Russell Wilson and then Joe Flacco. So they had Joe Flacco in on Thursday, Russell Wilson on Friday, and Russell Wilson, of course, also visited the Browns on Thursday. And they traded for Kenny Pickett and don't really have any options because Deshaun Watson is hurt and won't play this year. And so that's where things stand. I mean, Russell Wilson surely won't be back in Pittsburgh. They've made it clear they don't want him. They prefer Justin Fields or Aaron Rodgers to him. So I'd be shocked if he returns to Pittsburgh, but they're just waiting on Aaron Rodgers to make a decision here. I mean, the league year opened. He could have made a decision Monday, Tuesday, of course, but the league year opened on Wednesday. He was released on Wednesday. Free agency obviously really began Monday. So it's the end of, what is this, day 5 now. The middle of day 5 is we're just trying to figure out what Aaron Rodgers is going to do. I think it's pretty clear the Steelers are a better option for him. I think the appeal of the Giants would simply be his chance, getting to stay in New York. He can keep his house regardless, right? So it doesn't really matter. But, stay in New York and get a chance to lead a young team, I guess, in a less pressure situation. I mean, if he leads the Giants to 7 or 8 wins, people will be happy. That's not getting them to the playoffs. So I really don't. I don't see where the significant appeal is in terms of the Giants for Aaron Rodgers. Like, I understand why they want him, but if the money is reasonably equal, it's very clear the Steelers are a better option for him. But again, I can totally understand why the Giants would want him, because you got a GM and a head coach who need to win now, and you're in an offseason where the quarterback class in this draft is not great. So, yeah, that's where things stand. I would. Is there a world in which Joe Flacco and a draft pick are what the Giants go with? Sure, because all that has to happen is Russell Wilson picking the Browns and Aaron Rodgers picking the Steelers. So that's where things stand.
And just looking overall at this whole thing, and you mentioned the whole win now thing. Do you think Rodgers still makes the most sense in order to do that win now, or do you think that, say, Russell Wilson, and you pair him with his ability his penchant to throw the deep ball with Neighbors and say somebody else, like say if they do draft Travis Hunter or what have you. Who do you think makes the most sense for the offense that Dable wants to use?
Yeah, I think Aaron Rodgers is the best of those three options. It was clear last season that he could still play, even though the Jets had a terrible year. He is not the player he once was, but he's still a pretty darn good player, and he's certainly better than Russell Wilson, certainly better than Joe Flacco. So I suppose, there's a situation where the Giants do not draft a quarterback if they get Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson. They're going to draft a guy if they want to have to settle for Joe Flacco. But so none of these guys are obviously their quarterback of the future, and that's ultimately the goal here, right? Like, you find a quarterback who you can develop, who can win you a Super Bowl eventually. You're not hanging a banner for 7 or 8 wins and keeping the hot seat GM and head coach employed. Like, that's not the goal. Like, so the Giants at some point, whether it's this draft or next draft, have to find a quarterback who's going to be their long-term answer. Maybe they don't want to force it in this draft, and maybe that's why they're leaning into this Aaron Rodgers thing and saying, look, he's going to be our guy, and we're going to pass on a quarterback. We're going to go ahead and pick Travis Hunter and get this team, I guess in a chance to win more games and be relevant in 2025. Again, they're not. I guess you have to do it in steps, right? In terms of building a team. But Aaron Rodgers is obviously not a long-term solution for the Giants. Is he better than Russell Wilson or Joe Flacco? Of course. Is he the player he once was years ago? No, obviously not. He can still play. I think the biggest concern is this. It's the inconsistency of the Giants' offensive line. You saw when the Jets' O-line was inconsistent last year. That paired with Rodgers' immobility at the stages of his career, that was a bad combination. He got hurt. He had to play through injuries. You could totally see that happening again. I mean, the Steelers' offensive line is not perfect, but it's better than what the Giants offer. And I'm just not buying this idea that you roll Andrew Thomas back out there and the Giants' offensive line all of a sudden is really good. Like, sorry, but your center, John Michael Schmidt's still really inconsistent. Your left guard, John Runyon, was not good last year. At right guard, you're rolling potentially with, perhaps a draft pick. They brought back Greg Van Roten, who's 35, their right guard last year. I mean, this all comes back to the fact that, they whiffed on Josh Azudu, the 3rd round pick in 2022. He's unplayable. And, you're going to move Evan Neal to guard. Okay, fine. He's not, but it's hard to imagine him becoming like, becoming a starter. Like what Mekhi Becton did in Philadelphia, it's a little different. I mean, you're talking about a guy who was productive at the time with the Jets and had injuries. Like, Evan Neal just has not been productive, period. So I just don't see a way in which he's going to be productive immediately at guard. Maybe eventually. And then Jermaine Illuminor, right tackle, solid. I think they should be fine at tackles if Neal stays healthy and Illuminor plays that way. But the interior line's got to be a concern. And if you're Rodgers and you look at that and you're honest with yourself about this, where you're at in your career and what happened last year, do you want to go into that? Do you really want to do? I mean, the whole point for him should be to try to do anything possible to get back in the playoffs and win another ring, right? Like, that's probably not happening, right? In terms of winning another ring. But, does he want to go out with at least having a shot at getting into the playoffs of the Steelers, or does he want to go out with like an 8-9 record with the Giants, which is honestly completely hollow? So that's sort of where I stand. I think he's the best veteran option for them. And they're clearly their best opportunity to win this year, because you can't say a rookie is going to be that unless it's like a star rookie, a big time prospect, which there isn't in this draft. But I don't think they are the best option for him, if that makes sense.
You just killed my vibe, because the reason why I'm saying that is I was looking forward to a banner for 8 wins. I mean, if the Indianapolis Colts could put 2014 AFC participant, I thought maybe you can get a wild card banner or something like that. But in all seriousness, though, for me, it's something about Rodgers that I don't want him around a younger team. And you're asking a lot for the Giants to take on, not just for the on the field. And I know they're under the gun with Joe Shane and Brian Dable to save their jobs, but there's something to it with the off the field stuff, whether it's the McAfee, whether it's the other stuff in what have you, political stuff. There's just vaccine message. There's still just a lot of stuff that I don't know if I want to bring him in. And I know you hear the things about Russell Wilson and the corniness vibes and the Carlton, the memes and all that stuff, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I know he brings all that stuff. I just see him being a little bit more of a piece that helps you build long-term if you get past this 1 year. Like for me, I think the Giants, I think they'll definitely be better than what they were last year. I really do. Some of the pieces we'll talk to you a little bit about the pieces that they added. I think that puts them in a better position for them to do that. But a lot of times we've seen so many of these teams. I mean, if you go back even to like the quote unquote dream team in 2011 Eagles, what have you, when you look at a lot of these teams where you can amass all this talent and names and everything. But the one thing that always comes back to is the chemistry and the locker room, and you don't want to, and some of that stuff. And I know like Devontae Adams, Alan Lazard, I know they played with him a long time. They say he's a good guy, play with the locker room. Yeah, that's great. But some of the other stuff, I just don't know if it's worth it for the 1 year to build it down. I mean, heck, if it does implode, hey, the Giants will be picking up very high the next time they're up there. So who knows? Maybe Arch Manning's in their plans, and this is all part of John Maher's master plan. Who knows? Could be any of that stuff. But I'd rather I wouldn't roll with Flacco. That's like oh boy, do you start update the resume now type of move if you have to do that and pair them with that. But yeah, to me, I don't know. Do you worry about the off the field stuff?
I mean, I think you'd be surprised at like the number of guys in an NFL locker room who maybe don't have like political beliefs that vibe with what, I don't know, with logic a lot of times, or like worldviews, so like he's not the only guy who has views that are a little bit like wacky. So I don't think that part of it or McAfee's is that big of a deal. In terms of so like how does he fit in the locker room? Like remember last year, he called out Mike Williams like very publicly for running the wrong route. And so like how would a young receiver like Malik Neighbors take to something like that, take to getting called out? Maybe he wouldn't mind it. Maybe he would. So that to me is more pertinent than, Rodgers having kind of wacky opinions or alignments off the field, or him doing McAfee or whatever. So that's where I fall on that. Like to me, and then the other thing is like if they sign him, they may not draft a quarterback high. Like they may just take a guy in the like middle round to be developmental backup type. They may not. Well, we'll get to like who they're going to have a realistic shot at, but like when you looked at this initially, it's sort of like the value. The only thing that they need from Rodgers, like if they were to draft a rookie quarterback, the most important thing is he going to be able to mentor the kid, right? So that's it. That's the only thing that matters. And you've heard Jordan Love, praise for what it's worth, like publicly, maybe it was not great. Rodgers' mentorship. So that's the only thing that matters if they draft a quarterback, but it might be moot because they might not draft a quarterback if they sign him. If only because this is not a great quarterback draft class, and maybe they only like Cam Ward, and they realize or think that they're not going to be able to get him. So being able to mentor a young quarterback is, if they draft one, is critically important, like the most important thing, because again, it's about building toward a Super Bowl. It's not about winning 7 or 8 games. It's about finding a guy who can be your future, right? So if they draft that guy this year, then they absolutely need Rodgers to be willing to help the kid. And let's be honest. I mean, Giants fans have no loyalty to Rodgers. The minute they think he's a clown, like he was the guy who was a joke punchline the last 2 years with the Jets. If they sign him and then they draft a quarterback, say at number 3 or whatever, say Shitter or Sanders, and then Rodgers starts struggling, the calls for him to be benched will be so loud. They don't have loyalty to him like they did with Eli Manning, right? Like no one's going to be sad if they, to say like, oh, they should bench him. No, people are going to be calling for that very quickly. If they draft a quarterback, they might not. So as far as, the McAfee stuff and his worldviews or whatever, yeah, I don't know if that stuff is impactful in the locker room. But the other things in terms of will he be calling out teammates? Will he show up for voluntary workouts. I mean, he has to after the debacle of last season with Egypt or wherever he went. So those are the things, the football things that are more pertinent. When will he be able to mentor a young quarterback if they draft one?
We're going to switch over and talk to free agency now. And the Giants have been busy when their prize free agent signing has been Paulson Adebo, the cornerback. And that is a position that was definitely one of need after watching the Giants pass defense last year. What impact do you think he'll make on that secondary?
I mean, Paulson Adebo will be certainly an upgrade from Deonte Banks. There's a low bar there, but they had to. Free agency is where you go typically to paper over your mistakes in the draft. And that's the bottom line. 2 years ago, they drafted Deonte Banks in the first round. He's not a number one cornerback. He might not be a number two cornerback. I mean, they gave Adebo basically a $40 million commitment for 2 years. That's what the contract is, $38.5, $40 million for 2 years. And so that's legit money. And they need to hope that he can continue to ascend and show he can be a number one corner coming off a broken femur, which is a concern to some degree. So they then look, I mean, does that bump Deonte Banks number two, or will they eventually just completely bench Deonte Banks and play Cordell Flott at the number two corner? And so Flott was a 2022 third round pick by Joe Shane, another guy who's been not great, but again, third round pick, hard to call him a complete bust. But Deonte Banks is that. I mean, that's clear. I mean, they do not believe in him as their number one corner. Last year, they wanted to draft Kamari Lassiter or Kool-Aid McKinstry. You saw that on Hard Knocks. So they clearly didn't trust, to maybe perhaps to some degree, Banks, but certainly not Flott, right? They wanted to pair McKinstry or Lassiter with Banks. Didn't work out because they had traded that pick away for Brian Burns. And so they weren't able to get either of those guys in the second round by the time their turn came up and they picked Tyler Nubin. Yeah, I mean, I think you see a GM here who's already kind of moving on from his high draft picks, and he has to because he needs to win now. Javon Holland in the secondary at safety. I mean, they clearly going to be an upgrade from Jason Pinnock, who's not like consistent starter material, but just a curious signing in that they didn't sign Xavier. Joe Shane didn't sign Xavier McKinney last offseason and is giving big money now to Holland this offseason. Now it's not the same money. I got to go and look at my notes in terms of like the true guarantee, but Holland is a little bit cheaper as I'm talking through this, but I think certainly in terms of will he be an upgrade? Yeah, I think, and then people have said like, oh, they essentially traded Javon Holland for Xavier McKinney and got the 99th overall pick because of its comp. They got a comp pick from Xavier McKinney walking. It's like, okay, fine, but like that assumes that Javon Holland is going to be as great as Xavier McKinney was last year. I mean, the guy was a first team All-Pro. I mean, that is a really high bar to achieve. And we'll see if Holland can do it. I mean, so the commitment there was McKinney got $37 million over 2 years and about $17 million in average annual value. And Holland's getting about 15 in average annual value and $30 million over 2 years. So a little bit cheaper. So not entirely apples to apples there, but they needed to do something to fix their secondary. They were atrocious last year. The only thing they did really well really at all on the entire team pretty much is rush the passer. And so they need to be better against the run. They need to be better in coverage. And these two signings should you think, help them do that.
When I look at Adebo, I think it was definitely needed, especially when you look at the receivers that the Giants are going to have to play in his division now. Yeah. Now that Deebo Samuel is in this with the Commanders, and you already had Terry McLaurin, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and to some sense, CeeDee Lamb as well too. So I think that was very needed, and he gives the Giants somebody that they didn't have last year, somebody who can actually play one-on-one and defend the pass and go against those top receivers and play the ball. And I look at the way that his potential turnovers he could have and a potential increase in sacks. You have a cover corner like that. He's not Pat Surtain, but I think he's in a good tier 2, tier 3 guy. And I actually really like the signing for them. And looking at the way that what he contributes, just that domino effect. If you get somebody to take away at least the one, or at least force quarterbacks to look at the other side of the field and turn it into like into a half field game with this defense. I think when you look at Thibodeau, when you look at Burns, those guys can really get some pressure and that could benefit them some more. So I like it. I think it'll have a more impact. I would like to see them draft somebody, another top tier cornerback. Maybe, who knows? Maybe you move up late in the first round and get a guy so you have that 5th year option in order to make sure he's there long term. You can pair these guys for a while. I think I'd like to see that play, especially with the extra picks you have now. So who knows? I think it's interesting to see that, and I think that it was a good job by Shane in order to sign him to that deal. Now, we know there's also Dory Jackson. That means that Dory Jackson's gone. When you look at his overall legacy that he left with the Giants, he was their big signing at the time there. What do you think that legacy is for him?
Well, I mean, he's not really that good anymore, and he didn't really play much last year. I mean, he played 276 coverage snaps last year, and he had a 64 PFF grade. Not great. He was a backup. They didn't even want to sign him. The only reason they added him late was because they're, in the training camp, because their cornerback situation was such a disaster. He was more of a full-time player. He was a starter in 2023 at a 45 grade. That was the final year of his contract. So he really tailed off. First 2 years of his deal, the Giants, 2021, 2022, really good. He had 80 and 71. Those were his coverage grades. So really good, 2021, 2022. Tailed off in a big way. 2023, a little bit better, and albeit in limited duty in 2024. So he's not consistent starter material anymore. Like, he's a good veteran depth guy. He's a good leader. I mean, he'll be 30 in September, clearly on the back end of his career. I guess, makes sense for the Eagles to have a guy like that start 82 games. Oh, by the way, and Adebo, he was a 3rd round pick. So just like Cordell Flott, 3rd round pick, guy started 51 games now. So and just got a big contract. So no one's saying that a 3rd round pick can't be good. By the way, that's one reason the Giants have been so terrible for so long, is they've whiffed on so many of these mid round picks. Even as they've hit on guys like Neighbors and Odell Beckham or whoever, So yeah. And right. So, but I think, Dory Jackson, that's sort of what he is at this point in his career.
And you know what? You brought up a good point in turn with the 3rd round picks, because they're still technically top 100, a lot of those selections. And you see that's the way you build through this draft. And it's going to be very important for Shane to hit on them, not only to save his job, but in order to, for the years beyond that, if the Giants are able to turn things around. And I really want to see some creativity in terms of those middle rounds in order to build that depth that's needed to last long terms, or in case injuries happen. Because I think the Giants have they have enough assets, I think, to at least turn it around and gain a couple of wins, and even though with that tough schedule, I think they have some stuff that they can be. They can be a tough out for any of the division teams. I think that'll still that. I think it'll be a tough out for some of these teams. When they win some of those games, that's still it's still to be determined in terms of playing the AFC West and the NFC North. But this is a good start. This is a good start for Shane to really cement his standing and potentially save his job if he's able to draft well and these guys start to pan out halfway through the regular season. And talking more finally to our final segment, we thank you everybody for listening to this. We're going to talk about the draft. And there are reports out there that the number 1 pick will be a quarterback, but it just hinges on if the Titans are really going to take one, and the number 1 prospect being Cam Ward, or are they trying to throw it out as a smoke screen to try to get another team to trade up and get some future first round picks and other draft assets. How likely do you think the Giants are moving up to that top spot? And how much is too much to give up in order to make that trade happen?
I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, just look at the Titans have not added anyone prominent and at quarterback in free agency. So that just signals that to me that they're kind of set on staying there and taking Cam Ward at number 1. And so that's the problem for the Giants, who won in week 17 last year against Colts, botched their shot at the number 1 pick, wound up behind 2 quarterback needy teams. And so that, to me, I think it's not happening. I mean, if you talk about what it would take, the Giants now have an extra 3rd round pick. So like they could trade this year's 2nd. Obviously, they trade away the number 3, but like setting that aside, this year's 2nd, one of this year's 3rd, perhaps the top one. And then I think it's going to take next year's 1st round pick to do it. That's what it's going to take. Was that worth it for Cam Ward? Like, probably not. It's a pretty desperate thing to do, but is he that much better than Shedeur Sanders? There's a chance. So, but I think it's moot, because I think the Titans are going to stay there and take Cam Ward. That leaves the Browns, right? So the Browns, they have Kenny Pickett. They just traded for him. He's a backup. If they sign Russell Wilson, that bodes really well for the Giants, for Shedeur Sanders being there at number 3. Now, the Giants sign Aaron Rodgers, and they could just take Travis Hunter at 3, or I don't know, say Travis Hunter goes 2, they could take Abdul, whatever. They could do something non-quarterback at 3, or they could trade back or whatever, if they don't like Shedeur Sanders. But Wilson to the Browns would open the door for Sanders being there at 3, and the Giants could get maybe not their quarterback, but a quarterback at 3. So, but a trade up, that's what I think it would take. Like this year's 2, probably the higher of this year's 2 third round picks. That would still leave them with number 99, because of the comp pick from Xavier McKinney, and then next year's 1st round pick. Like, I think if you're the Titans and you like Cam Ward, then if you like him enough, then you're just saying no thanks and you're staying there. But if you're willing to move off the pick, I think it's going to take an addition. People say an additional 1st round pick. I mean, it's understood that the team is trading back to the pick. Does that make sense? Like, it's really going to take 1 1st round pick, because you're getting anyway. It's semantics. People are they're not going to trade 2 1st round picks, because they're getting a 1st round pick. They're getting number 1 pick. It's a wash, kind of, whatever. So they'd have to trade away next year's 1st round pick. Anyway, so that's what I think it would take. I don't think it's happening. I mean, just look at the Titans. They haven't been linked to Russell Wilson. They haven't been linked to, who did they just sign though? They just signed Brandon Allen, right? So they have Will Levis, they have Brandon Allen. They are just lining up, jobber types, and they're not investing in if they had posted Russell Wilson on a visit, that to me gets your attention and says, oh, all right, well, this team might be willing to go the bridge route or whatever, and not draft a quarterback. Don't think that's happening. So
job squad for life. That's all it is. We're get Al Snow. Maybe he'll play and throw him as well too. Wrestling reference for everybody out there who follows that. Now, you brought up an interesting point. Now, say if the Titans and Browns do QB 1-2, and that does leave Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter on the board. Would you draft for best player available, which by some people is going to be Abdul Carter for an edge rusher, even though you do have Burns and Thibodeau, or are you sticking with Hunter and trying to use him as a cornerback and then some wide receiver packages? Which way would you go right now in that type of scenario?
So the worst case scenario for the Giants would be, again, I said it before though, I think if they sign Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, there's a possibility they don't pick a quarterback, right? But let's just say it's Cam Ward at number 1, okay? And let's just say that Aaron Rodgers goes to Pittsburgh. Where would that leave Russell Wilson? Okay, so say Russell Wilson, just for argument's sake, goes to Minnesota, all right? So that means the Giants don't end up with a veteran quarterback. Then I think the Browns could still draft Shedeur Sanders even if they sign Russell Wilson. But for the sake of this, let's just say that even if Russell Wilson goes to Cleveland or Minnesota, that the Browns wind up in either of those scenarios taking Shedeur Sanders. So Ward number 1, Sanders number 2, Rodgers in Pittsburgh, Wilson in Cleveland or Minnesota. Giants have no high-end, high-profile free agent quarterback. They have like Joe Flacco or somebody, or Jameis Winston, and they also miss out on the first 2 quarterbacks. So what do they do then? Are you going to reach for someone like Jackson Dart at 3? That would be a mistake, I think. So I think you take Travis Hunter. I think he's the best. You've invested Now, I don't think Thibodeau is a long-term answer for them, but I have not studied enough of this film to know, like, okay, is Travis Hunter as a corner and receiver a better player than Abdul Carter as an edge rusher? It's always going to be apples to oranges, right? Like, so I don't know. I think you invested pretty heavily in Burns. You're not that invested. You got Malik Neighbors on a rookie contract, and you're not that invested that heavily in Darius Slayton. You got a 2-year deal for what? Like, it's not number one receiver money. So yes, he's back, and I get that. He's a solid but not spectacular player. He got $26 million guaranteed over 2 years. That's the commitment. So yeah, I think Travis Hunter gives you a guy who provides impressive versatility, and he could play. I mean, Jalen Hyatt is not the answer. You talk about another bad 3rd round pick. I mean, they picked that guy. They moved up to pick him 73rd in 2023. He's been bad. So, okay, forget him. So Travis Hunter, Malik Neighbors, or, you talk about the number 2 cornerback spot, like being shaky for the Giants with Banks and Flott. Hunter could conceivably play over there opposite Paulson Adebo. So I think you take Hunter at 3, and instead of reaching for a quarterback, and you just say, you know what, in that case, then the coach and the GM are surely getting fired. You're talking about doing the thing that is the best for the long-term health of the franchise. That's what they should do. Now, would a desperate GM or coach like reach for a rookie quarterback at 3? Of course, he'd be a rookie. He's being drafted at 3. So a quarterback at 3, because, there's a world in which you say, like, oh, you don't want to give up on a coach and a GM after the just the first year of the quarterback, right? So like that's a self-preservation move. But I just think that would be a mistake, because it's clear that Ward and Sanders are the best 2 quarterbacks in this draft, and that the third option, whoever that may be, is maybe Jackson Dart, is significantly below. So there's so many what ifs. I think the biggest domino that has to fall, obviously I know the biggest domino that has to fall first is Aaron Rodgers. What does he decide to do? Where does he decide to go? Pittsburgh or the Vikings, maybe? Don't rule them out, or the Giants, right? And once that happens, Russell Wilson could figure it out, unless Russell Wilson just says, the heck with it, I'm going to Cleveland. And that takes one team off the board. That's one. So these pieces presumably are going to start to fall into place. Now, Rodgers has, as long as he wants, he could take the next 6 weeks to draft. We're talking on Friday right now. Yesterday, it's Thursday, in case you forgot Thursday comes the day before Friday, is 6 weeks from yesterday. So, how long are we going to be sitting around waiting on this guy? But that's sort of where I see the scenarios playing out. Like, you can run through all the permutations and possibilities right now, but once decisions start getting made, once Rodgers makes his decision, or Russell Wilson makes his decision, that will start to fill in some of those things that are now what ifs into, like, okay, this happened. Now what now?
There's something for me. When I look at it, if in a scenario, and if they are the 2 players down there, there's something to be said about having a rotation of edge rushers and basically just throwing fastballs left and right at those offensive tackles and putting pressure on them constantly and wearing them down in a sense. But you look at Travis Hunter and his ability to high point the ball, his ability to be able to match receivers stride for stride, his ability to read the routes early. I think there's a lot that can be said. And we talk about Adebo, and you put Hunter and Adebo together, all of a sudden now you're looking at that defense, you're like, wow, there's a making of a top 12, top 10 unit there. There are elements there. Sure, do they need to fill out? I would love to see a better fill out the off the ball linebacker a little bit more, and maybe another safety. Yeah, there's some things I can see there, but I think that's the play. And I know Abdul Carter is a very, very good player, and edge rusher is a very sought after position and a very expensive position down the road. But so is cornerback. And the way we've seen this league going towards that, not going towards, it is continually a passing league. Having a guy like Hunter there in your secondary is going to be vital, very, very vital if they want to be competitive. I think that's the best way. And also compare him, you put him on offensively, you put him in the slot, You put Malik Neighbors on the outside. Good luck. Good luck with that's really tough to defend on that side of the ball with those two guys on one side of the field. And I think that gives Dable some options. You're not going to see him on the field, I think, for like 40 NFL snaps and still playing defense, but offensively. But I think that's a way that's the prudent pick for them right now. But this is what makes it fun. We still got another month until the draft happens. A month and weeks are there until the draft happens. So it's be some very, very interesting times. And Daryl, I want to thank you very much for hopping on today and giving us the latest updates and giving your views on what's going on with the Giants. And I want to thank you all out there for listening to this podcast, Talk is Cheap. Be sure to read Daryl and Ryan Nowozinski's work or NJ.com/Giants. They'll have the continuing free agency news as well as anything that happens in terms of draft picks or other unforeseen things that happen. These guys will always be ready to go and post that content that everybody would like to read. So for Daryl Slater, I'm Chris Franklin. Everybody have a good one. See ya.